investor Mark Emmerman digest the news of the energy regulator's blow to renewable power. This is the news. Nersa released a consultancy paper this week, reducing drastically the 2009 renewable energy feed-in tariffs. Solar rates were slashed by up to 40% and wind by a quarter, a blow for investors like Emmerman. This office in Johannesburg is 800 kilometers away from the site of his proposed 75-megawatt concentrated solar plant, one of the most advanced in the country.
The amounts are substantial, and the other thing to remember is it is completely at risk. Given the current regulatory uncertainty, this has been emphasized. It's really only for the brave. The 40% decrease in concentrated solar from the existing tariff, it's very unlikely that any projects would be bankable.
Wind turbine manufacturer VESTAS, which has operations in over 60 countries, is in the same boat.
From a timing point of view, this is right before the RFP was to be released by the Department of Energy. And at this stage, the investors don't know what rate they will get under that RFP. From the second side, on the perception, is many of the business cases that have been sold to investors by either developers and to the banks have been done on the 2009 rates. And this, with the revision in the rate, of course, that means that this is a different investment. And from that perspective, it could change things quite drastically.
When rates were released in 2009, a flurry of investors flocked to South Africa's green economy. But now Nersa says the initial prices quoted for this power were too generous.
Yeah, I think structurally, South African refit tariffs always have to be slightly higher than the rest of the world because costs of capital are different. The country wants to pay the tariff in rand and raise rand finance.
On the other side, ABSA Capital admits 2009's rates were generous, but the drop means some of its clients may throw in the towel.
40% decline in tariff has a massive impact on cash flow. Solar space, there is a significant risk that we will lose some investor appetite. And we are facing a risk that there will be some projects that will fall off. In the wind space, there's a mixed reaction. There's still some projects that have very good wind resource that can still survive a decline in tariffs. Maybe not to the extent that it is right now, but they can survive a tariff adjustment. But others may not.
The first one is the principle of whether at the start of an industry which could create lots of jobs and fulfill the new growth paths requirements and contribute to the security of supply of the country, does South Africa as a whole really want to be potentially dissuading international investors at a time when FDI did decline in 2010? Had a moving of the goalposts, that's clear. And if there was to be a moving of the goalpost, if that was actually the policy objective, then probably the best people to say the tariff should be this is the market itself, because they will always have access to better information than a regulator who, in the document, has relied on largely academic work rather than the daily operation of the investor and capital markets.
The most important thing for us is really price certainty. Having everything aside, we need to know what the price is for the life of the PPA. That is by far the most important aspect of this whole thing. If it is too low, then we know that those projects won't work for us. If we have an indication that the price is going to change after we get approvals, which has happened in other countries, that is probably a lot more risky.
Nersa's Tembani Bakula told CNBC Africa the regulator has a duty to ensure that investors don't reap hefty profits at the expense of the South African consumer, who will ultimately pay the bill.
It doesn't really surprise me that the refit tariffs are being reduced because they were rather high, especially for photovoltaic, concentrating solar and wind. The tariffs were rather high, and as the world and the country and the technology matures in the application of this technology, we can expect to see the price of building and operating such renewable energy plants reduce. The matter cannot just be left in the hands of the suppliers of equipment and the suppliers of electricity. The user's interests have to be balanced. We cannot pay too much for renewable energy, and the job of the regulator is to look at it independently. And remember, the suppliers of equipment and the suppliers of electricity are not independent. and their job is to look after the customer.
There's no doubt that investors like Mark Emmerman see the opportunity in turning the African sun into money, but how much money is now the debate.